Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Prove Me Wrong podcast. I am your host, Pete Lieb. I'm glad you're all on board with me again today. I'm going to get back into the subject of government control again today. Control of your actions, your environment, even your thoughts. Are there sects of people in the world actually powerful enough to impact what you think, what you do, how you live, without your knowledge? To what purpose is that control useful to them? What's the motivation? Is there anything you can do about it, or are you just a pawn in a game you didn't even realize that you were playing? To discuss this with me today, my guest is Nick Redfern. Nick is a full-time author and journalist, specializing in a wide range of unsolved mysteries, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, UFO sightings, government conspiracies, alien abductions, etc., etc. He's incredibly prolific. He writes regularly for the London Daily Express newspaper, Fortean Times, Fate, and UFO magazine, as well as numerous television appearances as well. Among his many exploits, Nick has investigated lake monsters of Scotland, vampires, werewolves, aliens, sea serpents. Like I said, prolific. Well, who better to have on the show and talk to me today? You can Google Nick and his books, especially Control, MKUltra, Chemtrails, and the Conspiracy to Suppress the Masses on Amazon. That's what we're going to talk about today. And you can also find him on the internet as well. You can Google Nick Redfern and a lot of information comes up. Welcome, Nick, to the Prove Me Wrong podcast.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
So there are many things that you've written about. You are actually somebody who I wanted to talk about this idea of government control and conspiracy. But then when I kind of looked into you as a whole, I thought, wow, there are probably 9 things there that I would love to talk to you about. But I'm interested in how did you get started with this research? What was the genesis of what you do now?
Well, I think the thing more than anything else when it comes to conspiracies, it actually goes back to my father. He was in the British Royal Air Force, and he worked as a radar mechanic. And his job was basically to make sure that the radar, the equipment and the screens were working properly, and if not, to correct them. And he was involved in 3 radar-based UFO cases back in England, on the east coast of England, at a military place called Neatishead, which is a now closed-down military base, but it was open throughout the Cold War. And the radar operators brought in the radar repairers, if you like, like my father, and because they thought, they were malfunctioning because there are all these weird things going across the screens. And it turned out there was actually nothing wrong with the screens at all. And they really were picking up these high-flying, fast-maneuvering, hovering objects, which clearly, this was back in the 50s, there's no way, that we had anything that really had the ability to perform those kind of maneuvers and performance. And this went on for 3 nights, and everybody was told not to talk about it. And my dad didn't say anything until I was about 11 or 12. And he told me the story then of how they sent fighter planes up, and some of the pilots saw these sort of classic flying saucer type craft high in the skies. And as I said, everybody was sworn to secrecy, reminded that they'd signed the government's, back then it was called the Official Secrets Act, and basically you don't talk about what you did in the military or else. And so that's what really got me interested. And then when I finished school, I went into a magazine, the kind of people might like magazines on entertainment, sort of music and cinema and interviews. The sort of kind of people you'd see on the front of People or Us Weekly, that kind of thing. And so I thought, why not try and combine the background that I developed in journalism and apply it to sort of investigative journalism in the field of things like UFOs, and then that sort of spilled more over into conspiracy fields. So that's kind, really, of how it all really started, if you like.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that the way that the world has changed, because there was a recent UFO sighting, right? And I can't remember the Air Force, the gentleman's name, but that's on YouTube all over the place now. You know, the video of that that flying disc is now there, or that cigar shape. I think it's the Tic Tac is what he called it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, so the world has changed.
Oh yeah, it has. I mean, that's interesting because it's actually, you know, military footage, and I
Right.
mean, you go back 40, 50 years ago, you would not see that, you know, on the TV news in say 1956 or 66 or even 78, 76, 86, you know, and I think it's intriguing as to how things have changed in the last couple of years, you know, with the revelations that the government's had for a number of years, this sort of like a think tank slash research group looking into UFOs, and, you know, they got radar material, film footage from pilots, and it was all sort of successfully hidden for a long time. But I think from my perspective, the most intriguing thing about all of this is the fact that today, unlike, say, 10, 20 years ago, people like me who investigate UFO cases aren't sort of perceived as crazy people with no lives, you know. We're actually, you know, you can see regularly on mainstream news, you know, stories about the latest UFO encounters. And, you know, that has to be a positive thing to go from that angle where, well, these guys are just nuts talking about aliens and flying saucers, and it's totally swung around the other way to where it's actually quite respectable to talk about UFOs, as I said, mainstream media and just about everywhere else.
Well, you can't. The genie's out of the bottle at this point. In this internet age, in this age of immediate information at your fingertips, they cannot contain it any longer. So it's almost one of those things like, well, the horse is out of the barn. People are uploading their videos on YouTube. People are having chat rooms. They're having groups on Facebook, you know, and different websites with chat rooms. They cannot control that message anymore. Back in the 50s, 60s, who were you going to tell that you had a UFO encounter? You would tell the local sheriff or something, and he'd write down that you were a kook, and that was it. Now, with a couple of keystrokes, you are around the world with millions of other people who believe you, you know, who aren't looking at you like you're crazy. So, you know, that's definitely a benefit to me of the internet age. There aren't a whole lot of them to me, benefits, but
yeah, I think, you know, I agree with everything you say. I think the one downside of it all is that when it comes to the internet and you're talking about controversial topics, you know, it's very easy and simple in today's world for somebody just to, and I'm not talking about just, you know, hackers, you know, civilians. I'm talking about sort of government personnel in today's world. You know, it's very easy to follow somebody's, you know, every step, you know, every email,
for sure,
every Facebook message. So, you know, that is a downside, you know, when we're living in that world, and so many people have just sort of resigned themselves to, well, that's how it's got to be. Well, you know, for me, I don't see why it has to be like that. You know, if you're not doing anything, you know, breaking the law, you're not doing this or that, there's no reason you should be watched, you know. But it doesn't always work like that in today's world, unfortunately.
Well, and unfortunately, again, there are good and bad. And the bad is that you can't trust anything you see on the internet because anybody can attribute anything to anyone. I could put a picture of Donald Trump, just using an example, and I could put a quote of Hitler next to him. And 95% of the people who see that meme online will believe that Donald Trump said that. You know what I mean? And so because they have no way of objectively disputing it or researching it on their own, or they don't need to, you know, everything's so easy. It's at their fingertips. They just believe everything. So you see photos that are doctored, that are, you know, obviously faked. You see the phrases that are categorized to somebody than when they were actually someone else, you know, 200 years ago, whatever. So we're in an age where you have a lot of stuff at your fingertips, but you really have to be careful where you get the information, and is that information real? Is it true?
Well, yeah, absolutely right. I agree with you on that. I mean, when you're looking at the latest headline and the headline here and this and that, you're right. You just have to think, well, excuse me, where did the information come
Right.
from? What's the originating source? But a lot of people don't think about that. They just see the accompanying photograph and think, oh, cool, I'll share that with 125 people on here or on there.
And it goes viral, and there's 3 million people looking at it within 25 minutes.
Yeah, and of course, the big downside really is that we are living in an age where, investigative journalism, I won't say it's going away, but, a lot of newspapers and, are struggling because everything's free, they're struggling. And the ones who aren't struggling, the mainstream media, get knocked here, there, and everywhere. And so you have to kind of wonder, what's it going to be like 50 years from now? Is sort of mainstream media even going to exist,
Well, to jump into the subject of control, then I had a guest on my show, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, and he was a young guy. You and I are pretty much contemporary. He was a younger guy, and to him, the internet revolution and RFID chips implanted into all of us, these were all positives. These were all going to make our life easier. We were going to be able to get things much easier. We're going to be, we wouldn't have to worry about having a key for your front door because that chip in your hand will be an automatic door lock. And while, you're definitely respectful, that wasn't something I agreed with, right? That is not, maybe I'm just old school. So it is interesting to see how kind of that younger generation, he wasn't even 30, how those younger people coming up, they see this technology and this internet as a great thing. It's going to make life easier. Whereas somebody maybe a little longer in the tooth like myself sees that as government monitoring me, and I don't like it. So, yeah, so just to kind of get into it then, into the subject of government control, who wants it, how they get it. Who are the players right now, Nick? I mean, whether it be private corporations or government agencies, who is doing the majority of this control?
Well, that's a good question. And by that, I mean that, when you look into the world of control today, I think you can make a good case that, when we talk about the government does this or the government does that, I think very often it's actually not government agencies. We start looking into, powerful corporations and companies and old families and big money that, they're kind of the manipulators as I see them. The kind of people who can achieve things and alter perceptions on various issues, and in some ways, even without government actually realizing what's going on. In other words, the idea of, I don't sort of like to use words like secret government because it kind of, you become sort of a target for people saying, oh, you're just a, conspiracy crazy guy.
Right.
But I do think there is something to that angle, the idea of sort of ancient secret societies, big money, old families, banking, economy, people in the economy, people who do have the ability to turn things on their head, and people go along with it. And I think that kind of thing actually happens far more than we realize. People are very good at whipping up, fear and paranoia just by, writing an article. I mean, you look at the whole issue with viruses right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying it's not, a dangerous time right now, with the coronavirus and everything. But, I mean, if you actually look at the number of people in America who die from regular flu every year, I mean, that's a huge number of people,
Sure.
Don't talk to people, don't get close to them, don't touch other people, it's easy to change people's mindset to where, I could see easily if this went on and on, well, let's just stay in the house and never leave it, which would be wonderful, these people who are doing all the manipulating, if we never left home.
So I hear a lot, and you were talking about secret societies, and I hear a lot about that, and you see it a lot in documentaries and things like that. And I hear about the Rothschilds all the time, and I hear about George Soros all the time. I've never actually seen any of these people. So I'm assuming most normal people have not. So that's why it becomes so hard to wrap your brain around that somebody that you've never seen is, behind closed doors somewhere, moving our lives like chess pieces with these unlimited funds. That where did you get these funds?
Yeah.
Where is this wealth coming from? Do you have any insight on that at all? Where are these people? How do they maneuver? What makes it real for the average person?
Well, I mean, that's a good point, but I do think a lot of it comes through the media, and it's very easy when you've got powerful figures on the news talking about this or that, and which could be dangerous to us, and people very, very quickly buy into what they're seeing and what they're hearing. When you see somebody on the news saying, don't touch doors when you go into the gas station or wherever, don't do this, don't that, stock up on this and stock up on that. People, it doesn't actually take, even if there's a conspiracy behind doing this, you actually don't have to do much to ensure that conspiracy angle, if you like, and this portion of the control aspect of it all, you don't really need to do much at all. It's like a tidal wave that just suddenly spreads and spreads. I mean, I spoke to my dad a couple of days ago, and I said, how you doing? He's like, oh, it's all over the news, coronavirus, and telling people if you go into the local stores, don't touch the door when the person before you, and it's very easy for somebody who has the ability to have a great deal of visibility, whether it's in the media, mainstream or not, but people listen. And as I said, nothing of a major nature has to be done to create that tidal wave. If you've got the money to be on the news and warn people of this and terrify them, and you spread the story here, there, and everywhere, almost overnight, it's like a click of the finger that everybody kind of gets into that mode that it's like the closest thing you could imagine to the zombie virus or whatever.
No doubt. It is scary. And I don't think people even realize it. They don't even think about it because they're going about their normal life. That a company that essentially has no way of making, like Facebook, they don't sell anything. They give you the app for free. They're not selling anything except they're selling you. They're selling you to others. Then you don't even, you don't make that connection. And you'll be, you'll look at something on your phone, you'll look at something in Google, right? And then you'll go to Facebook and that thing will be in your Facebook timeline. Almost instantaneously is there. And you're like, oh, I was just thinking about that, or oh, I just researched that, or oh, I just said that out loud in a room, and it's on your Facebook timeline. That to me, and they have so much power and so much influence, and again, people don't even realize that they're being manipulated or maneuvered without even being conscious of it.
Yeah, you're right, and I mean, that's why I sort of view the internet as a good thing and sometimes a bad thing, and I don't mean that because I'm of like a certain age. It's I'm as a writer and a journalist and a lecturer. I use the internet sort of 9 to 5 every day. Monday to Friday, usually when I'm working. Doing books and articles and whatever. But in saying that, there is this angle where just about everything on you and about you can be accessed. And when the people who are accessing it are actually the people who really shouldn't have a right to do it, if you've not done anything, that's wrong or whatever, nobody should be watching you, So that is the issue I have there. I don't have actually any issues, with somebody, if you've got, diabetes or something like that, and, somebody wants a chip, with all their medical information in them, if they want that, that's not so bad.
I agree.
But when it turns into a chip that actually, allows someone to monitor your every movement just because they want it, that's where, for me, the line should be drawn. And you mentioned like younger generations sort of growing up in a world where, they didn't grow up anything like us. We'd be out till like 8 or 9 on your bike, riding around town with your friends. You'd let your kids do that tonight. The cops will be around and grilling you for being bad parents. Well, it didn't hurt us, but we're told. But we're told that that it's not okay. I mean, it's like when I was like 11 or 12, me and my school friends, we'd be out on our bikes, and I'd come home, with scratches and grazes on my knees and arms and elbows. My dad would be like, "What did you do?" "Oh, I fell off my bike again," And you cannot do that today. But there's no reason to tell people you shouldn't do that. It's just another way of kind of dumbing down society and just making the kids, sort of sit in their bedroom, texting, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes sort of a driving aspect of your entire life, then, you wonder where things are going. I mean, another angle, I saw something on the news, just recently, I should say, about how for the first time, population ages in the US have actually started now to decline due to like diabetes and things like that. And, and it's almost as if, there are people out there who just keep feeding them, like cattle. And, who cares if 100 years, the average age is then like 55 or whatever, and everybody's shuffling around. I mean, that could easily become the way of the future. It's like food becomes your god and you become the cattle to the farmer.
So what is the motivation for that? I mean, what is the motivation for those people who are pulling the strings? What is the motivation to have just a zombie-like sick populace with their heads in a computer screen and not they're unproductive. They're not going out any longer. They're no longer, well, I mean, I guess they're no longer looking around them and seeing the injustices that are occurring. But I mean, what is the motivation for that? Maybe start there.
Well, I think to put it kind of like simply, the less that we, the public, the people, the less that we have the ability to do things, the less that we're going to be a threat to people in charge, or we're going to be the kind of people who just don't care. They don't want to go voting. Well, why not? Well, because there's a new kind of pizza out or something, and they'd rather. I'm not being sort of attacking people, but the fact is, when it comes to things like elections today, I mean, a lot of people just don't want to bother. They just don't care. And I think for one side, that's appalling. But for a lot of people in government, who running for office and looking for this position, that position, if we do not care about it, and we really are just sitting at home watching TV or doing this or that, well, to these people running the stage, so to speak, it's perfect for them because, you're lethargic, you're not doing anything about it, you don't care about the state of the world, then it's sort of a recipe for disaster in terms of, losing what we have or what we should have, sort of freedom. And the tragedy in all of this is that much of it isn't occurring by, guys in black fatigues and, army boots and knocking people's front doors down, like, in some communist world or whatever.
Right.
You know, it's not happening like that. It's happening because slowly, bit by bit, we're allowing all this to happen. You know, I mean, I don't have kids, but I mean, if I did, you know, I would encourage them to sort of, you know, go out with their friends on the bikes, and we'd all go out on a Saturday afternoon or whatever for a couple of miles and have a good time, you know. And I think when you're in a world where you just accept, you accept your kids can't go out, otherwise you're going to get arrested for, you know, for being a bad parent. Or, you know, if you don't want to do, you know, you feel you just don't want to go out anymore, you know, you just want to sit inside. Well, if we let that happen, you know, it's actually our faults for allowing things to get into that sort of terrible state, really.
And the news media has helped that. I mean, the news media has made it over the last 20, 30 years, has given you the full impression that it's not safe to be outside. It's not safe to be outside after dark.
Right.
And,
Yep.
you know, there's somebody out there in a white van with blacked out windows waiting to abduct you. Even though there's always been bad people in the world forever, you know, that has not changed. But with that instantaneous social reach and that instantaneous media that we have, or something that happens in California, we know about it here where I live in Florida immediately. That never happened before. So you were able to kind of live your localized life in relative, you know, you weren't in fear. Now something happens in, you know, the other side of the world, you're living in fear of it here. You know, it wasn't something that happened here. So I get it. We have sown those seeds. We have planted that seed that it is no longer safe to be outside. It is no longer safe to be in groups where other people are. You do have to be isolated, but we're going to make it so that all you have to do is say, you know, Alexa, turn on the TV, and we'll take care of you. You know, you just sit back and relax, and we'll take care of you. So
well,
that's a
I mean, you're right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, Alexa, you know, with Alexa, I mean, again, the technology is not bad technology. You know, it can be extremely useful, you know, but again, that you've got that angle of how easy, you know, it is actually to hack, you know, and listen, and who's doing the listening, you know. That's the big problem with the modern day world. You've got these sort of two sides of it. One which could really enrich society if, you know, we weren't sort of going down this dumbed down society fashion. And if all of this technology was all geared on the positive side, we could have a really great civilization. But that's whoever's doing this, that's not what they want. They want kind of behind your doors, live in fear, you know, watch what we want you to watch, you know, and that's a pretty grim future, really, when you think about it.
Right. So in your book, when you're talking about MKUltra and some of those, you know, the government programs that were really designed to kind of see how maybe, you know, mind control through hallucinogenic drugs or through hypnosis or things like that, what kind of impact that would have on people. MKUltra right now is so ingrained in the American consciousness. I mean, every movie about a spy, he was an MKUltra. Every, you know, it's in movies, it's in popular television, it's everywhere. It's like it's the worst kept secret of all time. How did MKUltra, you know, what's the deal there? How did it come into existence? You know, what was the ultimate goal?
Well, basically, I mean, MKUltra was one of actually quite a few programs, secret programs, initiated from the late 40s onward, and which essentially were designed to try and understand how the human mind could be altered and manipulated. And although MKUltra was certainly the most well-known and visible and infamous of all these programs, and MKUltra was primarily a CIA program, but during the same time frame, sort of late 40s onward, the Army and the Navy and the FBI and the CIA, as I said, were all looking into the ways and means to alter the human mind. And certainly one of the early examples was when there was a realization that LSD and things like sodium pentothal, the so-called truth drug,
Mm-hmm.
how they could affect people's minds, their moods, and even, the stories about so-called Manchurian candidates, that scenario of trying to create sort of mind-controlled assassins, that was a genuine piece of the research. And this went on for years. And it wasn't just in the United States. There's a place in the UK, in the county of Wiltshire, in the southwest of the country, called Porton Down. And Porton Down is a place which, since the 50s, has worked heavily in the fields of hallucinogens, mind-altering technologies. And today, a lot of it has gone beyond, the angle like you might see in an old 1950s movie, somebody slips something in somebody's cup of coffee or whatever. It's not really at that stage today. I mean, we're talking about like ELF weapons and, directed energy weapons, which can wreak havoc with people's mindsets, depression, anxiety, even technologies, that can disrupt your heart rhythms. All of this technology exists. And of course, if you talk about, an agency feeding somebody LSD in the 1950s and somebody else today, using, if you like, ELF technology to create depression or anxiety, you've got two very ways across, a lot of different decades, but the goal is the same. It's altering the mind of the targeted individual or the people. So, in other words, we actually have, mind control programs today which are very different to, the old days, as I said, slipping something in someone's drink or whatever. But there's also the angle of mind control just by creating depression, by demonstrating how crappy the world is,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of it as well. I mean, you look at all the number of people today are on like Xanax and Prozac and things like that, where because science, society, they just cannot function in today's society. So, and that in its, if people who take my, Xanax, Prozac, etc., they're not being subjected to mind control, but it's definitely the alteration of the mood of the person. And,
and it's also rewiring the brain. I mean, what better way to do that? And I completely agree in terms of, the LSD back in the 60s, 70s. That's one thing, but that they went so far as to call that an illegal substance. Now, all of these are prescription medications. These are all legal. You can have them on your counter, and you could be altering your brain chemistry. You can be completely changing who you are, and it's socially acceptable. Back then, if you were taking LSD, you were part of the counterculture. You were some punk kid, revolutionary.
Yeah.
You weren't a part of society. Now, if you aren't taking Klonopin or Xanax, you're an outlier.
You're absolutely right, and I understand if people have anxiety, stress, depression, they need medication, but the sheer level of it and the abuse of it, and the reliance on things like this, which clearly didn't exist, in just a few decades ago. It's just, it's kind of just zoomed, the requirement for things like this. And, it's like a social disaster when you put, huge amounts of tranquilizers and anxiety medication in the hands of people, and those same people are told, don't go outside or your kids will be killed, literally. And you're constantly bombarded with bad news. Well, you can, I sometimes think that all they really want whoever they actually are. But, is what they want is a dumbed-down society that does nothing really than goes to work and comes home and doesn't peek out the curtains for fear of what they might see, and then they get up for work and come home. Restaurants will be closed down because everything will be delivered to you, so you won't have the kind of social interaction on a Friday night with all your friends. Now you'll sit at home and somebody will be you'll have thousands of people delivering food to you, which is how it's going now. And again, there's a good and a bad thing there. If you've had a bad day at work, and to have somebody deliver your food is not a bad thing. But when it starts to overwhelm and kind of infringe upon what we've always done on a Friday night, going out, have dinner and a few beers with your friends, that could go away, all because of these very subtle changes and manipulations to society and the mood set as well.
Well, they've created the disease that they can then treat. So they created the disease through the social media and through the constant bombardment of negative news stories, negative, just feelings that you get online. There are very few, everything in terms of the interactions that you get online nowadays. I don't know, maybe not all of them, but the majority of them are negative in content. And so they create the monster, they create the disease, and then they treat the disease. And treating the disease actually makes them money. So, they can treat your disease with those drugs that alter your chemistry, while then still keeping you sick by just kind of constantly feeding you that negativity. And, like you said, can't look outside, something bad's out there. But you also mentioned in terms of, and I just want to jump back real quick because I had it written down. You also had mentioned that potentially MKUltra working towards developing assassins. And I had heard something somewhere in terms of like James Earl Ray or maybe it's Lenin's assassin as well, that they may have actually been those type of just mind-altered individuals who weren't really aware of what they were doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's sort of one of the scary things, when you see these assassinations going on, and have gone on for decades, and you find these sort of kind of subtle, weird issues in their backgrounds, and they were tied to, the connections here and connections there, and, I mean, I guess the most visible one is like Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean,
right.
Kind of predictable, but I mean, here was this guy who, decided he was going to leave the US and go to Russia, and he was allowed to go, and then he was allowed to come back with a wife whose father was actually attached to Russian intelligence, and then, he finds himself, in the heart of this assassination. And unlike some people, I do think he was actually involved, but I genuinely think he was also, what he called himself, a patsy.
Mm-hmm.
I think he realized that he was going to be sort of the person that everyone perceived was the guilty party when he'd been sort of left in the lurch, and then that's why he went on the run, I think, because he realized that he was going to be seen as the single assassin. But, I mean, the threads and connections that you have with a lot of these assassins, it's never straightforward. It's never the guy just did it because he didn't like that person or whatever. You've got, like, for example, Oswald himself, connections with people like David Ferry, who was obsessed with viruses. The guy who lived in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And Guy Bannister, retired FBI agent, who, for example, became good friends with Lee Harvey Oswald. And, so you can, in a lot of these stories of assassinations and hitmen and things like this, there's so very often something in their background that makes you think, wow, there's more to this,
Have there been any, in your opinion, any of those high-profile, quote-unquote, assassinations more recently? I think the last one that I would have potentially linked with maybe Kurt Cobain, but has there been anything that you can see that wasn't just a government sponsored? We sent the Navy SEAL Team 6 in there, but that may have been more of a conspiratorial assassination.
Well, I mean, one of the things I've written about on a number of occasions, and which sort of particularly intrigues me, is the huge amount of people since 2001 onward who work in the field of microbiology, viruses and bacteria and things like this. The sheer number of people in the microbiology field who've died under mysterious circumstances, like car accidents, airplane crashes, sudden heart attacks, suspicious suicides, this kind of thing. And that's the deaths of all these microbiologists, scientists. The sheer number is, it's all over the world. I mean, you only have to Google, microbiologist deaths, and you'll see a huge number of cases, to the point where, to me, I just cannot believe that all of these car accidents and plane crashes and suicides are actually what they are, because this is a specific, highly regarded discipline in one field, microbiology. If it was people dying left, right, and centre, and they were all, working in a field that there were millions of them, working in a store or whatever, one particular store, well, you could say, well, that's just coincidence or whatever. But when you've got people in a clearly delineated field like microbiology, and they're dropping like flies, then for me, that is one of the more recent examples of sort of a program secretly designed, I think, to wipe out certain figures in the microbiology field. Now, who's doing this or why? I don't know, and I think most researchers who've looked into it don't. Some have said, is it a foreign nation doing it to us? Are they trying to wipe out our microbiologists so we don't have the best people in the fields of like virology? But whatever the answer is, that there's no doubt that there is a real phenomenon in that field.
So there wasn't a connection between what they were working on. There was simply a connection between the field that they worked in. Right? It wasn't like they were all working on a specific virus, or they were all working on the cure for cancer or something like that. It was just the fact that they were all microbiologists.
Yeah, but they did all work, in certain areas, and there were a lot of really weird and disturbing stories floated around in 2001 when this started, where there were rumors that somebody was trying to sort of weaponize a virus that would only target certain types of people, which, when you start going down in that path, that's like Hitler.
For sure.
So I think, there's a lot to be learned from those, not just from the microbiologist deaths, but also for what they were actually working on. That's one of the important things, sort of lethal viruses and, viruses designed to spread extremely quickly, that kind of thing. And you have to wonder, who is it and what's the goal in terms of wiping them out, and who's doing it,
Well, that reminds me, and that brings to mind, there are actually, and you may know this already, I mean, I had read something recently there was something like 25, 30 or so holistic doctors who were working on and curing cancer holistically, and they were also turning up dead, by the dozens. Being, there was carjackings and there were suicides and there were quote unquote natural deaths, but they were all holistic doctors, and the majority of them were working in the field of cancer. And so that's kind of why I was asking that. And I don't know if you know that story. It's really up and down kind of the East Coast here for sure, the Carolinas and in Florida. I don't know if you've heard about that.
You're right. You're right. That did actually happen. There was dozens over the last 4 or 5 years, 6 years, of people working in alternative health, holistic medication, things like that. And of course, in today's world, medicine is a gigantic business. I hate to say it, but in many respects, it's gone from being a way of treating people and getting rid of disease and so on, and it's more about big business and profits. And imagine if somebody working in alternative health came up with a cure for cancer, every cancer. That would be one of the most greatest things on the planet that could happen.
Absolutely.
But for the people who reap in gigantic profits for cancer treatments on millions of people every year, I hate to say it, but would some of those people actually like the fact that it's fully cured, or would they be looking at the lack of profits and so on? In today's world, it's a shame that we have to ask questions like that, but the fact is we do when we look at people dropping like flies who are working in these arenas relative to things like cancer.
So, I have a couple more minutes left. And so I did want to ask you about two things. I wanted to ask you first about chemtrails, and then I wanted to get into NASA for just a little bit. But first, can you give me a little bit more understanding about chemtrails? Because I hear a lot of talk about manipulating the weather or maybe kind of seeding the atmosphere with this chemtrail. What is the purpose of the chemtrails, and how is it not just kind of a factor of maybe the condensation in the air? I don't know. Can you clear that up for me?
Well, to a degree I can.
Okay.
When it comes to chemtrails, I'm actually someone who kind of sits on the fence a little bit. A lot has been said about chemtrails, and a lot has been sort of suggested and speculated, but even within the realm of conspiracy theorizing, there's a lot of sort of debate and different theories as to what's going on. Now, the obvious scenario for most people who may not know about chemtrails is they're saying, they're thinking, well, they're just chemtrails. They're just everyday chemtrails from regular planes that, and everybody's interpreting, or a lot of people interpreting them as chemtrails. And the theory with chemtrails is basically chemical trails. The idea being that highly toxic chemicals are being unleashed into the atmosphere, and slowly but surely, but on a sort of regular and ongoing situation, unleashing these dangerous chemicals into the atmosphere. They're sort of a lot of people kind of buy into the theory of like aluminum, which aluminum in it's just filtered down to the smallest point, potentially. It can actually, affect people's mindsets, their mind, and there's a lot of interesting research done to show the connections between, like, for example, aluminum and Alzheimer's. So basically, the conventional scenario, if there is a conventional scenario for all of this, is that chemtrails are being used to dumb down the population, sort of create health issues, and again just provoke more and more anxiety and depression in society. But that aside, it's sort of the population angle, the idea that there are people who are one way or another want the human population to be drastically cut down in terms of the number of people who actually are on the planet. That's sort of what a lot of researchers see as the primary goal, if you like.
Well, if that's just the goal, why not just keep going the way we're going? Because to your point, people are not going outside as much. People are not meeting other people as much. The growth rate of the population, by what I've seen, is slowing from what it used to be. People are waiting. We as a society, we have stressed, have a career versus have a family. So our whole society has changed. Gone is the idea that you have to be, in a monogamous, 2-parent household, we can do it all by ourselves, single moms, all the kind of the breakdown of the American family or the family in general. Why not just keep going that way with the, eventually people will, have relationships online. They'll never actually see anyone. And you will see this drop in the population, especially since our population is aging right now with that huge baby boom group that's now at the point where they're going to be dying off.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So I also wanted to talk just briefly about NASA, because NASA has had, in terms of government conspiracies and or just kind of shadow organizations, you hear people who don't believe a word of what NASA says, right? They were founded by Nazis, pulling all the Nazis over from Germany, Operation Paperclip. We haven't actually gone to the moon. We haven't achieved anything outside of low Earth orbit. What is your stance on NASA? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, this is, again, like another one where I sometimes agree and sometimes differ with other people as it relates to, some of the conspiracy theories that have been put forward, in the direction of NASA itself. I mean, certainly one of the most visible things that's talked about today is what's known as the secret space program. The idea that, after the several flights to the moon, we walked on the moon, and it all ended in 1972.
Right.
And then we had the space shuttle, which is gone now as well. And we really don't have much of a manned space program anymore. We're sort of working in tandem with the Russians using the international space program, international space satellite. So in that sense, what we're looking at is a situation where, for many people, NASA has become sort of a shadow of what it was in the late 60s through the 70s and early 1980s. No doubt about it. A lot of people think that. However, when it comes to this issue of the secret space program, the theory is that NASA has like a hidden aspect to it, where maybe they really have gone clandestinely back to the moon. Maybe they've even made missions to Mars. That's the scenario that the adherents to the secret space program stick to. Now, my personal view is I don't think that NASA is guilty of sort of creating this secret space program, and it would not surprise me if it does exist. Clandestine flights to Mars using highly advanced technologies way beyond what we had in the 70s. But I think there's a distinct possibility that somebody has a secret space program. Whether it works out of Area 51 or somewhere like that, I don't know. But I think in this case, I don't think NASA is a guilty party. I think they genuinely are doing, a lot of good work, and they're limited by the technology. But I think somebody has technology far beyond NASA, and it's whatever that group is, a cabal or who knows, a secret, program which gets its funding through black budget operations, that kind of thing. I would not be surprised, if somebody has managed to do something that none of us would ever have thought would have happened, gone to different planets, back to the moon, and not told us, that I could see that have, happened. But I think in that case, I think NASA is out of the loop, actually.
See, I just have a hard time getting the rationale as to why you would do that and not tell us. So whether it was NASA or anyone else, what's the benefit of hiding it?
Well, I mean, if there's nothing to see and nothing new and nothing amazing, I would agree with you that there's actually no impetus to even do that. But, I mean, one of the things that interests me a lot are some of the strange photographs that have come back from NASA, from Mars, which do actually seem in some pictures, to show remnants of structures and technology and things like this. And I don't believe it's all just, sort of like pareidolia, which is, the eye sees what it wants to see. I think there's more to it. And I sometimes wonder if the reason for making clandestine missions back to Mars may be because something's been found on Mars that maybe has a tie, with our ancient civilizations in the distant past. The possibility of some sort of advanced civilization that existed on Mars maybe destroyed itself, but also intriguing theories that maybe they're still there, just hanging on for the, in the final stages, if you like, deep underground under Mars. That's an interesting little theory, and I sometimes wonder if possibility, the simple answer is they don't tell us what's going on Mars because it could impact on our history, and whoever's pulling all these strings does not want any issues to complicate situations, and evidence that there could have been life on Mars and it could still be there does complicate situations.
So my last question then tonight is, in your opinion, what can be done at this point, if anything, to slow down the path that we're on, or be able to take back our sense of privacy at all? I completely agree. I think you might have made the point. When I'm out of my house, I have no problem being on camera. I have no problem that companies or corporations or businesses that I go into want to have surveillance cameras for their own safety or for legal reasons. I'm totally fine with that. Where I want to have that choice is inside my own home, and I don't have the Alexas or the Ring door knobs there. I don't have those things, but I do have a smartphone, and that smartphone is an open microphone at all times. So what can we do now? Is there anything that we can do, in your opinion? What would be the options for us going forward to maybe regain some of our privacy?
Well, I mean, in one sense, you could say it's like an enormous task to try and, have this balance between the good side of more and more advancing technology and the downside of that same technology being used to essentially just keep watch on us 24/7. The goal is to, for me at least, is to make the balance between the two. Nobody's saying we shouldn't watch people who are dangerous. Of course we should. But, that doesn't mean that somebody's elderly grandma in Wisconsin or something needs to be watched, when she goes through the airport. Of course she doesn't, So what I would hope is that in the future, common sense would come back.
Okay.
We need a way to realize that kids can go outside and play, and I think more than anything else, there's one way. If people are sort of, angered by this or angered by that, and they don't want to do this and they don't want to be told to do that, well, it could come down to one thing, that it sounds like it couldn't be done, but it could be done, and that is for 7 or 8 billion people all in tandem say no.
Right.
But it requires everybody to say, we want things back how it used to be, but with the technology that is helping us. And that's what we don't have. We don't have the balance. And if 8 billion people said, we're not going along with this, 8 billion people, walked the streets and demonstrated. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, exhibiting your thoughts on this. And if, 8 billion people do that constantly, then the world could come back to how it should be. But it requires those people to come forward, and everybody says, look, this is what has to be done, and society won't collapse. We'll just, develop a sort of a good balance between, to progress, but also not to forget the past as well.
Yeah, they're going to have to shake off a lot of the current chains that we're under before that happens. But I agree with you. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining the show tonight and providing me some very good insight on the topic. Would you like to spend another moment and let listeners know? I don't know if you make personal appearances or you have a book signing coming up. I know you have. I'm sure you have a new book coming out soon. Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have a book actually coming out at the start of April it's actually called Assassinations. It's like an A to Z of assassinations going from, like, for example, ancient Egypt and Julius Caesar, right through the famous ones like JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King. And there's a significant chapter in there on the microbiology scientist deaths. So that's Assassinations. That'll be out at the start of April. Then in May, I'm speaking at the Contact in the Desert UFO conference at Palm Springs. And if people want to contact me, I've got a blog called World of Whatever. So just look up Nick Redfern, World of Whatever. You'll see my blog. And people can reach me on Twitter and Facebook as well.
Awesome. Again, thanks so much, Nick. And I would love to, like I said, do have probably 7 or 8 other topics. I'd love to have you back on the show at some point and maybe discuss some of those as well. But I really appreciate your time this evening.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Thanks.
So that was Nick Redfern. We were talking again about control. Why do corporations, why do the government, why do they want the control, and what are they doing to get it? How are they getting it? I think a lot of it has come down to the point now where we are breeding children who are in control. The media, the internet, has pushed this narrative now that you can't go outside, you can't interact, or you're going to die. Point blank. Coronavirus, you can't go outside, you can't get together with a lot of differing individuals, or you're going to die. You can't go outside after dark, or you might be killed. Stay inside, watch some television, play on the internet, play on your phones, be safe. They've really gotten to the point where everything is kind of under control. And we do have a lot of individuals now who don't ever go outside and look up and wonder anymore. We're told everything. We're fed everything. We're watched and monitored constantly. Well, what do you think? Do you think that there is anything that we can do at this point, or do you like it the way it is? Maybe you like it the way it is. I know I talked to Ryan O'Shea a couple months back, and he had a much more altruistic view on it, a much more positive spin on the emergence of technology, the emergence of the internet age, the messing with our DNA, messing with RFID chips. And maybe that's right. Maybe we'll get to that point where he is the one that's correct. But it's an interesting topic to me because I definitely want to have that ability to say no in my own house. So again, what do you think? Do you have any concerns about the way we're going? Do you think there's anything that we can do now to prevent us from being just completely, like he was saying, just basically walking zombies within 20, 30 years? Never leaving your house, having your food delivered to you, never having a real interaction with another human being. Everything's done online. And you end up being like that movie with Bruce Willis. And I can never remember the name of that movie when I need to. I think it was Replicant or something like that. But it was a good movie where they lived their entire lives through a robot. The people were actually in a house. The robots went out and did their daily interactions. It was a fascinating idea. If you have any comments or questions or concerns about what we've talked about today, you can contact us on our email address. It's provemerongcast@gmail.com. Drop me a line anytime. If you have suggestions for other people to talk to, other guests for the show, or you'd like to be a guest on the show, drop us a line, provemerongcast@gmail.com, and we'll bring you on the show. If you have an interesting topic or something we haven't talked about, we'll cover it. You can also find us on Facebook or Instagram. The name is just Prove Me Wrong. You can go on there and search. You'll find us. If you're just looking for the podcast itself, obviously we're on SoundCloud, Tunein Radio, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, really any platform that you find podcasts, you can find the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Like and subscribe to the podcast page, and you will be notified when a new episode is released. Also, we're on YouTube. You can see right here on this scroll. Like and subscribe to the page on YouTube. That way, as new content is delivered, we deliver every week. Once a week, we have a new episode. You'll be the first to hear it. You won't have to go searching for it, and you can keep up with the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Before we go then, I would like to say, this episode of the podcast was brought to you by our friends at Javaremix. Javaremix is a perfect blend of 100% Arabica coffee. It's infused with CBD oil. Start your day off on the right foot with a great tasting cup of coffee with all the demonstrated benefits of pure CBD. Javaremix offers traditional ground coffee as well as single-serve K-cups in both regular and decaf. If you don't like coffee, they also have teas, bath bombs, face scrubs, really anything that you're looking for. As an added benefit for our Prove Me Wrong listeners, if you go online right now, it's javaremix.com, and enter the promo code Prove Me Wrong, you'll get an additional 20% discount off your entire shopping experience. And Javaremix offers free shipping for all orders over $40. So you really have no reason not to give it a shot. Once again, that's javaremix.com, promo code Prove Me Wrong. We're also brought to you tonight by ZendoZones citronella burners from JT Eaton. They are shaped like fearless little bug-repellent tiki gods. So let Surf and Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily bring the islands back to your backyard with ZendoZones citronella burners. ZendoZones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones. They're perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, poolside, and more. You can enjoy the outdoors again. You can find them on Amazon and select Ace Hardware stores. So collect them all today. So once again, for my guest, Nick Redfern, I am Pete Lieb. This is the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and we'll see you again soon.